Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Jazakallah khair for joining us today. As Abdullah Ibrahim said, we inshallah will kick off with a quick poll just to get an idea of the audience today and who's joining us. So if we can put that first poll on. So we just want to know what your ages are, at least we then inshallah pitch it right. Seems we've got a nice mix of age groups here, alhamdulillah. Okay, anyway, let's end the poll there, alhamdulillah. So we've got a mixture of younger and us slightly older people, the 30s and 40s, but inshallah, what I really want to do today is make sure that the discussion is interactive. So I've got a presentation, but what I would like to do is get your views on a number of different issues that we're going to address today. So without any further ado, I'll share my slides with you. So today we're looking at the subject of, can Islam create a harmonious society? I think it's a very relevant topic given many of the problems that we see around us in the world. I think humanity as a whole is facing challenges with not only COVID, but many other challenges facing people across the globe. And what I really want to do is understand how Islam solves these problems. How does Islam address these issues? So what, in your opinion, is the central message of the Quran? What do you understand to be the central message of the Quran? Completely open question. Please share your views. You can unmute and make your comments, or you can put a message in the chat group. But what is the central message of the Quran? Sorry. What is the central message of the Quran? Any views? Anyone there?
Everyone should be able to unmute if they want to speak, inshallah, or alternatively, you can put your answer in the chat. Someone's put take mankind from darkness into light. Let's put in the chat.
Okay, great point. Other views? What do people think? What is the central message of the Quran? Given that this is the month of the Quran, month of recitation, many people do khatm of the Quran, they complete the Quran. So what do we believe, what do we understand to be the central message? Another comment I can see is justice. Any other views out there?
I've got one here: to give all humans guidance, to act as the basis of Islam, and its teachings are pivotal in understanding Islam. So there's a couple more come through to me. Tawheed, someone's put Tawheed in the chat.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's all of those things, isn't it? And this is a verse from Surah Ibrahim that I think encapsulates it perfectly. Can I just confirm everyone can hear the audio as well?
ألف لام را كتاب أنزلناه إليك لتخرج الناس من الظلمات إلى النور بإذن ربهم إلى صراط العزيز الحميد.
So this is a really powerful verse from Surah Ibrahim, the opening verse. Alif Lam Ra. This is a book which we have revealed to you that you may bring forth mankind from every kind of darkness, dhulumat. So it's plural, all forms of darkness, into light, one light, as we know, which is the deen of Islam, and direct them with the leave of their Lord to the way of the mighty, the innately praiseworthy. So all of those points that mentioned are completely right. It's taking mankind out of all forms of darknesses, all forms of injustice, all forms of oppression, all forms of worship of other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and ensuring that we worship him alone and we follow his guidance. This is clearly one of the central messages of the Quran and reiterated in other verses as well. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. We have only sent you but as a mercy to mankind. So clearly we know this is a very fundamental aspect of the message of Islam. So what are the biggest problems facing the world? Moving on from that initial question, what are the biggest problems facing the world? Again, please post your comments in the chat or come off mute and, you know, give me your views. What are the biggest challenges? I can see poverty is one of them. Money, war, greed. Any other points? Anyone want to?
Someone said inequality in the chat on mine.
Inequality. Okay, perfect. Feel free to come off mute. As I said, imagine we were in a group, in a session together, in a room. You know, feel free to, you know, voice your opinions. Poor leadership.
Confusion around sort of gender.
Yeah, that's a brilliant point. Thanks, Bilal. Any other points?
Someone said climate change or oppression.
Yeah. Again, I think all of the points mentioned are absolutely correct. We've got poverty, we've got issues with money, leadership, gender issues, injustice. There's so many things to look at. Islam
depression, anxiety.
Depression, anxiety, mental health issues. You know what? The list goes on. Let's be honest. We could be here all day, couldn't we? There's so many.
Just to come on this,
yes,
I think a lot of the issues or problems that have been cited are symptoms of the problem. So there may be numerous problems that are identified, but just make a separation between what is a symptom and what are the key problems or the things that are stemming from the root. Yeah, so maybe
absolutely. So I think all of these things are definitely symptoms. They are problems for the people experiencing them, problem for the whole of humanity, but they have an underlying cause, which inshallah we'll try and delve into. Okay, so moving on. How many racially motivated hate crimes occurred in the UK last year? I've put the picture of George Floyd there, who was killed, as we know, by the police in the US. But this is not a US-centric problem. This is a problem that actually engulfs the whole world, racism. But I think we'll put the poll on, Osama, if we can. We've got about half the people voted. Any more want to cast their vote? Please do so. Okay, let's close it there. So we have a slight majority, I think it's 154,000, and the next down is 104,000. So the correct results are actually, let me just close that, sorry, 1 second. So it's 104,000 people have been racially, or hate crimes have occurred due to racial reasons. That's quite a shocking number. If you think about it, that's something like 1 every 5 minutes. And that's just racially motivated hate crimes. You know, that's quite staggering when you consider that this is a society that 28 years ago had the Stephen Lawrence murder, and there was huge inquiries made into into this and why those actions occurred that day 28 years ago when Stephen Lawrence was killed by a group of racist thugs. And it was found the police were institutionally racist at that time. But 28 years on, this is the figure from last year, 104,000 people racially, essentially attacked in one form or another. And when we even look at racial tensions, we can see that there was 42,000 religiously motivated hate crimes also last year. Again, a staggering number, that's almost 1 every 10 minutes. And many of those are Muslims, but other people of other faiths. But in a country or in a society where we're always being told that there is religious tolerance and understanding, that secularism actually brings people together, doesn't differentiate between religions and races. We actually see staggering numbers of people being abused due to their religion and their race. In the US, you're 3 times more likely to be killed by the police than a white person if you're Black. You're 4 times more likely to die during pregnancy or childbirth if you're a Black woman than a white woman in the UK. And you're 5 times more likely to be stopped and searched by the police in France if you're of Arab or Black ethnic origin. These are just, you know, basic stats I've taken, some of the stats that kind of tell us something very shocking about the nature of our societies, which is that people are targeted due to their race. They are actually disadvantaged, but be that due to, you know, with law enforcement, with healthcare, with many different aspects. I read another stat recently that Black women are 5 times more likely to be sectioned under the Mental Health Act in the UK. And many reports have found that there's institutional reasons for that. There is a negative view of people of race. And why does that happen? These are the questions that we need to ask ourselves. Now, in the US, how many people, based on a 2018 census, actually live in poverty? Let's remember, the US is by far the richest country in the world. How many people live in poverty? So the polls just come up. Let's get a few more votes in. We'll stop it in 10 seconds or so. So the majority of people are going for 23 million at the moment. If you got 38 million. So the US population is what, somewhere like 340 odd million, something like that. Okay, so the number of people actually found to be in poverty in the US is 38 million people. That is essentially 12% of the population. So 12% of the US population, by their own definition and standards of poverty, are deemed to be under the poverty line. The richest country in the world, 1 out of 8 people. So it just puts it into, you know, stark reality that the problems that we're facing. This is not a problem that's isolated to what people call the developing world. But in the developing world, obviously the issue is much more extreme. You have 10% of the world living in what is known as extreme poverty, which is less than $1.90 a day. And even in the UK, and this is partly brought about by the pandemic, there was a 47% increase in the number of 3-day emergency food parcels being distributed from March to September 2020. This is from one of the trusts, the Trussell Trust, but there's others who report very similar figures. So we even seen in developed societies where it's expected that people have, you know, meals 3 times a day, basic things like shelter, clothing, are actually struggling to make ends meet and actually put food on the table. We know that even Rashford, the United footballer, made a plea with the government to ensure that they continued with free school meals, even outside in the holiday period, etc. Again, it shows that the reality on the ground, people struggle to actually find food to eat, even in the UK, which is one of the 7 biggest economies in the world. And just looking beyond poverty, one of the factors that definitely contributes to this is something we all know, is corruption. And in 2016, there was a huge leak exposing fraud and tax evasion from a Central American nation. And I just, again, another poll, which of these 3 nations was at the heart of this tax evasion expose? Okay, most people are going Panama. Let's get a few more votes in. Yeah, let's give it another 5 or 6 seconds. Let's close the poll. Okay, so yeah, Panama was the country. The Panama Papers exposed what was essentially a huge level of corruption that was taking place in the world. And, you know, it kind of implicated many people, many leaders, many businesses throughout the world. And this is just actually the tip of the iceberg. Corruption is so endemic in the world that what we have seen actually is that nations that are struggling, such as Egypt and Bangladesh, etc., have huge levels of corruption to the extent that basic, needs are not being met, such as, hospital care and food, etc. These two stats were really shocking when I was looking into this. There's about $1.26 trillion lost per year within developing countries due to what they deem as corruption, bribery, theft, and tax evasion, and other illicit financial flows. And even in the EU, which is supposed to be obviously a standard bearer in terms of doing things the right way, being above board, democratic nations, as we were always told. In fact, there was 132 billion lost. And this is actually based on the EU Commissioner for Home Affairs' own study. To put that into context, that's roughly half the NHS annual budget. So half the NHS annual budget was lost to corruption last year in the EU. You think about hospital care, GP care, medicines, operations, all those costs, half of that care was lost to essentially people undermining their own states, their own nations, by cheating, by bribing, by theft in one form or another. Recently, we've seen Boris Johnson under the microscope for his refurbishment of his flat. We know that David Cameron recently was in the headlines for all the wrong reasons when he was actually doing the bidding of a very big company who were trying to get access to, public sector contracts, essentially. He was looking to make something like £200 million on that deal. Just put that into context. This is the previous prime minister of the country doing the bidding of a private company and actually trying to open up doors by, sending messages to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak. This is the kind of corruption that we're now seeing it's essentially endemic. It's happening at all levels, lobbying, and essentially people trying to get favors from the rich and famous and rich and powerful. One stat that may shock people is Gaddafi, before his death, was actually known to be one of the richest people in the world. But the amount of money that he had actually amassed is quite staggering. 200 billion is what he's estimated to have essentially stolen from the country. That amounts to, if you were to give every man, woman, and child in North Africa, which is about 200 million people, that money, you would be able to give them 1,000 each. Just think of these nations where the average wage is £50 a month. In Libya, this land which is rich in oil, it would amount to $29,000 per person. These are lands where people can't even afford basic healthcare. These are lands where oxygen is cut off in hospitals because there is insufficient funds and is insufficient planning and insufficient management to ensure that people have those rights. Even in India, we can see that some people call the up-and-coming superpower was unable to ensure that oxygen remained on tap in hospitals despite the warnings they had of the COVID pandemic. These are the kind of results of corruption. It's not kind of a hidden crime that doesn't have an impact. It leads to death. It leads to misery in societies. And moving on to one of the points that Bilal mentioned, one of the big issues that faces society at the moment is the relationship between men and women, gender, the kind of even just the recent crisis that we've heard about Ryan Giggs, the ex-Man U footballer, who's been in court about harassing 2 women. Recently, I hear there's another actor who's been in the media again for apparently harassing 20 women. These are the kind of issues that are happening now repeatedly, that we constantly see in the media, the Me Too movement, which is exposing what has become a really prevalent problem, which is that women are being abused, they're being mistreated in society en masse. This one I don't think we put onto the poll, but we'll just ask the question. What percentage of women stated that they had experienced unwanted advances in the workplace based on a TUC survey? So this is Trade Union Congress survey. So they polled women and asked them, had you experienced unwanted advances in the workplace? What number do you think it was? Someone can unmute and have a guess or put it down on the chat. Yeah, so a couple of people
So far,
said
52% seems to be the favorite.
Yes, yeah, so it's actually 52%. Other studies actually show that the problem is even more widespread. But again, it depends which angle you take and which study you look at. But what it does show, almost exclusively, that the majority of women have experienced some form of abuse or unwanted advances within the workplace. And in society at large, that's quite clear. We had the recent murder of a woman by a police officer, and we know that led to many discussions taking place over social media and the news about women not feeling safe to even walk alone at night. Harassment of women, based on what the police have recorded in 1 year, which was from April 2019 to March 2020, and this actually excludes Manchester because they use a different way of recording the data, was a staggering 758,941 domestic abuse related crimes. And that's by far majority are women. That again, that number is just absolutely shocking when you think about that's literally 1 a minute, if not more, are reporting domestic abuse. And a study in France estimated that as many as 43% of women have been inappropriately touched in society. Again, almost 1 in 2 women to be touched by men with, in a society where we talk about consent and they talk about the rights of women and they talk about, respecting one another. This is happening at such a staggering level. So I think Asif alluded to the real question here. Why have the current systems failed to create harmony in society? I wanted to look at those examples to just illustrate the level to which we now see problems existing in society and the disharmony that's caused. But why? This is the crucial question. And this is why I want to open the chat and hopefully people to unmute and share their views. Why do you think these current systems have failed in creating harmony in society? Any views there? Any comments? Why do you think these issues exist? Hamza saying society's foundations are wrong. Any other views?
People don't feel they're accountable, so no accountability.
I think that's an excellent point, no accountability. Any other views? Man is attempted to solve problems rather than take from the Quran. Yes.
Isn't it maybe because just the way the setup of the whole society makes it difficult for people to know what is the standard that they should live by, because it's very confusing, it's very contradicting. Go for your own interest, but at the same time, there are some very small regulations that you have to follow. So it's a confusing kind of world that they live in. Nobody knows what's right and wrong really at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I think another comment that's just come up as well, man makes laws which are contradictory. I think that's a fantastic point as well. We constantly see the need to reassess laws. So constantly Parliament is reassessing what they believe to be right and wrong. Just recently in France, they banned girls under the age of 18 from wearing the hijab, but at the same time they allow consent of actually engaging in, engaging in sexual activities younger than that. How could that even occur? That someone placing a cloth on their body as modesty is actually seen as more of a risk to them than actually engaging in activities like that. This is the kind of contradictions we see, that in one state in the US, the age of consent is one age, in another it's another. Alcohol is deemed, abhorrent to such an extent that it gets abolished in the US, and now it's so prevalent, it's maybe one of the biggest, markets in terms of food and beverages in the world. Bilal's also commented, everything is about being free, but the same freedom is shooting themselves in the foot. I think that's an excellent point. That's definitely something that we can see when it comes to wealth, when it comes to relationships between men and women, when it comes to corruption. There's so many different factors that have led to these failures, but essentially there are some common themes here: freedom, contradiction, not having a clear framework for thinking, not having any principles, no accountability. So I think these are all excellent points. Jazakallah khair. We'll move on.
Just to come onto that,
Please do.
When they view a problem, they seem to be going straight for the legislation to try and change that problem. And this is
excellent
critical
point.
Because they're not targeting the root issue there. They're not addressing the concept. And maybe you can come on to that, inshallah.
Yeah, that's exactly a point that I want to cover. I think that's hugely important. In fact, just recently I was on LinkedIn and someone had posted about Stephen Lawrence, the anniversary of him being killed. And I don't know if, I think there's probably quite a few of us who are old enough to remember when that happened. It was quite a shock when it initially happened, because obviously he was a young guy being killed by these racist thugs, and the police essentially failed completely to investigate the crime correctly. And they all were essentially let off scot-free in terms of their mishandling. And what occurred to me actually is that one person posted on LinkedIn saying that discrimination has increased in the workplace for ethnic minorities, essentially. But if you think about it, any of us who are in a workplace within the UK will tell you that you're constantly being told about discrimination rights. You're constantly being asked to do training for equality and anti-discrimination, but yet the crimes are increasing and the discrimination is increasing. Why is that occurring? It's because they've looked at it as a legislative problem. Exactly what you said, Asif, and that's exactly the comment I made. Until you change your view and don't view it as a legislative problem and understand it starts with the mind and your outlook on life, then you will always fail, because what you're trying to do is essentially control people through laws without actually changing the thinking that sits behind those laws. So I think it's a fantastic point. So why do you think Islam is able to solve people's problems? Again, please put your comments in the chat or unmute and make your comments.
I mean, the basic answer to this is from the creator, from who created you. At the end of the day, who's going to be better to give you a set of rules to live by, than the person who made you, the entity who made you, the creator.
Absolutely. And that is the fundamental point here. But is there any other comments that people would like to add to that? Any comments on the chat? It sits with our fitra. Another comment. It's not from humans, therefore it does not favor certain groups of people. So that's again goes back to the point about being from the creator. Any other comments?
I'll just come on as well. We have a 1400-year track record of solving problems. So, they always say that it's never proven until tested, and we have a track record. So.
Fantastic point. Yeah, I think they're all really good points. Any other points before we move on to the next slides? Okay, so I mean, yeah, absolutely, all those points are crucial. The fundamental point is the message from our creator. It addresses human beings. Who better to address human beings than the one who's created us? It's not open to contradiction. It's not open to the changing to time and place based on people's own whims. It's been proven and tested, and it's succeeded in delivering unbelievable results in terms of the issues that we've discussed, which we will address now actually in the next few slides. So all of those points are extremely valid. And I think a key point here is it addresses the mind as well as addressing the laws that govern us. And that is crucial. And hopefully the next few slides, we can delve into that a bit more. It's the true word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It deals with all instincts as well. Other comments? Jazakallah khair. Okay, next.
ومن أعرض عن ذكري فإن له معيشة ضنكا ونحشره يوم القيامة أعمى.
Now, this is really a beautiful verse that I think summarizes the discussion we've just had. That when you leave the remembrance of Allah, then you will basically have a depressed life. So one of the brothers said right at the beginning, depression, anxiety. and all the things that come from that, the poverty, the not feeling secure, not feeling safe, all those issues emanate from that problem. You've abandoned this message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that addresses human beings by the one who created us, by the one who understands us. He understands our temperament, he understands our needs, he understands our desires, and he manages that. He gives us that perfect guidance, the perfect balance to satisfy those issues and those things. You abandon that, then this is what you have. It is just depression, it is disaster, and it's a failure in the akhirah. I mean, it's basically you've lost them both. You've lost in this world and you've lost in the akhirah. You may think it sounds so beautiful, the freedom, I can do this, I can do that, but actually it's not tried and tested, and it's not been made by the Creator. You're making up as you go along, and you're constantly trying to cover the gaps. You're constantly trying to find where that next hole in the ship is that you need to close up before you drown. That's the constant need in these societies. There's never any level of security where people can actually feel comfortable and secure and happy and harmonious. So what social problems does the Quran address? Just thinking about what we've already discussed in terms of the problems that we face. We've been reflecting on the Quran over the last almost 20 days or so. What are the social problems that Islam addressed in the Quran? Open again on the chat and comments, please. I'm still with you. Interaction between men and women. Anyone else want to add anything? I mean, there's so many issues, isn't there? SubhanAllah, the managing wealth, everything. I mean, it's a guide for life, isn't it? If we take the Quran and the ahadith, the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it covers all aspects, relationships, everything, absolutely everything. If you think at the time when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was, when the Quran was revealed onto him and he addressed the issues that face society, he addressed things like poverty, he addressed things like the orphan, he addressed things like the treatment of the orphans, he addressed things like inheritance, the treatment of women, everything, everything. It's asabiyya, we're talking about tribalism, nationalism. It addresses all those aspects. And going back to that point that we made, it doesn't only address them from saying, here are a set of rules. It actually addresses the concepts that sit behind those rules. Ultimately, that's the power of the deen. It addresses things from the mind so that people have conviction in the deen, and the rules are just part of that implementation. But first of all, you have to be convinced in terms of the belief of this message, but it also in those values that it teaches, it proclaims. Okay, we'll move on. So, just want to ask a quick question. What's your ethnic origin? Can people just put in the chat what their ethnic origin is, what their parents, where they originate from, or just shout out in the comments, what's your ethnic origin?
Pakistani.
So we've got Palestinian, Bangladeshi, Pakistani, Indian. And if we were to ask the Muslims at Tarawih tonight, we'd have pretty much probably 20, 30, different ethnic origins. This is the Deen of Islam. This is the Deen of Islam. The Deen of Islam started, as we know, in Mecca, and it spread. We've got Indonesian there as well. This is the Deen of Islam. It spread to all corners of the globe. And it's a message that has brought together people from all sorts of walks of life, different colors, different languages under this deen. Why am I saying that? Is exactly what Asif said. 1400 years tried and tested. This is the message that truly brought people together. This is the message that even led Muslims to going saving the lives of non-Muslims who were under oppression for their religion, such as the Jews of Spain, such as the mistreatment of the people of black origin in Arabia who were mistreated by the Quraysh and other tribes who always looked down upon them. This is the message that actually brought true unity. And I just wanted to play a 1-minute clip of part of Malcolm X's speech from Hajj, the letter he wrote from Hajj. It's a really beautiful speech. And I just want to play a minute of that. So I'm just going to go on to the next slide.
There were tens of thousands of pilgrims from all over the world. They were of all colors, from blue-eyed blondes to black-skinned Africans. But we were all participating in the same ritual, displaying a spirit of unity and brotherhood that my experiences in America had led me to believe never could exist between the white and the non-white. America needs to understand Islam, because this is the one religion that erases from its society the race problem. Throughout my travels in the Muslim world, I have met, talked to, and even eaten with people who in America would have been considered white. But the white attitude was removed from their minds by the religion of Islam. I have never before seen sincere and true brotherhood practiced by all colors together, irrespective of their color. You may be shocked by these words coming from me, but on this pilgrimage, what I have seen and experienced has forced me to rearrange much of my thought patterns previously held, and to toss aside some of my previous conclusions.
So, I mean, this is a really, really beautiful letter, and the letter is longer than this, but it really strikes at the heart of the problem. Just last year, George Floyd was killed. The day that George Floyd's killer was convicted, a 15-year-old black girl was killed by the police. Every day, black people are being killed by the police in the US. This man wrote this letter, 50, 60 years ago, and look at the problems not resolved. In fact, they become much worse. Segregation's been lifted, but actually segregation still exists. Crimes against black people were apparently legislated against, but they exist even by the law enforcement themselves. So this is the heart of the problem, and he understood it. It removed the racial element from the mind. And it just reminds me of one beautiful narration that occurred between Bilal anhu, and Abu Dharr al-Ghafari anhu, when Bilal was in a gathering with a few of the Sahaba, and Abu Dharr was speaking. Bilal is said to have interrupted him to say something to correct him. And Abu Dharr replied back by saying, "You son of a black woman," in a derogatory manner. Let's be clear, in a derogatory manner. So Bilal was very upset. I mean, he's basically being abused by one of his own Sahaba. And he went to the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ was really upset, really angry. And he came back to Abu Dharr and he said something, and I really want to focus on this point, which I think Asif is absolutely spot on. He said, "You haven't removed, there's some traces of Jahiliyyah you haven't removed." That is the understanding of Islam. It's not a law. It's not a law. We don't need a law to say don't kill a black person. We need the law that says Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made you the same. You're not better. You're not better. Why do you think you're better? Because you're white, or because you're brown, or because you're black? It's nothing to do with that. That we're creating you into nations and tribes so that you may know one another. I forget the verse, sorry, but the best of you are the ones who have the greatest taqwa, not the ones who of a certain color, of a certain status. The Prophet ﷺ destroyed these concepts of status in Mecca. We know that the tribes always used to vie for power. Who was the most powerful? Who was the one with the greatest status? So when Malcolm X says, this is the true religion that can solve the race problem in America, he's right. And that's why we're zero way down that road of solving the problem. It will never be solved with the current framework. So how does Islam address poverty and corruption? So going back to our discussions previously about the problems that we face with regards to poverty and corruption, which are endemic in Western and developing countries, how does Islam address these problems? I just want you guys to share your views. Again, feel free to unmute and comment or put them into the chat. Any views, guys? Fairer distribution of wealth, good point, Hamza. Zakat and Sadaqah. Any other ideas and angles? Someone was about to comment there.
Yeah, sorry. No patent laws.
No patent laws, good one.
Competition in markets.
Yeah. I mean, that point about patents is so underestimated how bad it is. When you know, they're talking about vaccine poverty these days, where it's viewed by some estimates that it may take 3 to 4 years to give people in Africa the COVID vaccination. So let's leave aside the discussions about whether people like the COVID vaccination or not. Yeah, let's forget that for 1 second. Let's assume that scientifically it is something that people believe is a good thing to do, because that's why mainly Western nations are rushing to do it. So how is it possible that fellow human beings in this world will not have access to that vaccine for potentially 2 to 3 years? We know that the Zionist state has implemented it in minutes with their wealth. And in the US and the UK, we know many of us have received it, or we know family who have. Over 30 million have in the US, the UK. So it's really an interesting point, but just that one issue, you can see how Islam differentiates from the view of capitalists, which is all about ownership of ideas and wealth and business. It's a very different view. Checks and balances for people in authority, forbidding interest, taqwa, all fantastic points. So I'm just going to look at a few issues. Yeah. So you've got the motivates us to help the needy, orphans, and our neighbors in society. You've even got the concept of waqf, which is really about sharing wealth on another level. You know, you've got all these new kind of big billionaires sharing their wealth. It always seems to be with strings attached to reduce tax or something or another. But we had something called waqf, where people literally used to invest in, be it agricultural land, hospitals, other avenues of making money that they would share with people. But this is motivated by our deen, isn't it? It's motivated by the ayat that talk to tell us about the needy, the orphans, not going to sleep, you know, with your neighbors hungry. All these concepts that kind of build in you that fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we need to care for people around us, guarantees people's basic rights. We know that the hadith that talks about the rights of food, shelter, and clothing, that the son of Adam has a right to these things. We know that it encourages the circulation of wealth. It tries to prevent the hoarding and monopolies, where people try to hold back things of value so that they can make money on it. These kind of monopolies that we see around the world. Collection and distribution of funds such as zakat, which includes business stock. I mean, again, people talk about zakat, you know, as if it just happens in the background. Think about zakat. You're shifting 2.5% of wealth one way every year. 2.5% of people who have it goes to people who do not have it. You're literally shifting that wealth in a massive way to other people. Then you have regulates ownership of assets. So distributes land which is not being hasn't been cultivated within a certain time period. It ensures that certain kind of materials cannot be in the hands of private individuals. So, you know, you think about the sheer wealth that companies like BP, British Petroleum, and other big energy companies have. That kind of wealth would not sit with shareholders, it would sit with the people. So there's many, many different aspects to this, but it all underpins by the Islamic value system in the first place, which is securing people's basic needs, not seeing wealth as yours. This is a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we're encouraged to share it as well. In terms of dealing with corruption, I think one of the brothers mentioned taqwa, absolutely fundamentally what underpins every idea that we have. If you do not fear Allah, then why would you not steal? I would put the question to a Western person who's an atheist that you are stupid for not stealing because you have no accountability. Why make your life difficult? Why not take extra money? Why not take bribes? Why not give bribes? Why does it matter? You've got not accounted it then. The only thing they fear is what? Law. But then if you can circumvent the law, why not circumvent it? That's the problem you have. If that's the way that you're going to manage people's good and bad purely by legislation, then you're bound to fail. It's exactly what Asif said. Legislation won't work. It will always fail. Guardianship over public funds, so the prohibition of bribery, misuse of public office, and you have the enjoining of good and forbidding of wrongdoing is a duty on all people. This is a really important point. We all are part of this deen. We are all part of this ummah. We all have a responsibility. If we see something wrong with our friends, our family, our neighbors, we call it out with our politicians. It's not a deen that's separated from life. It's fully integrated in life. So moving on to the final point I wanted to address in terms of harmony, just as examples, because obviously Islam deals with every aspect of society. But how does Islam create harmony between men and women? Again, the floor is open for any comments or any comments in the chat. Any views? It's always strange giving a presentation on Zoom because you don't know what people are actually thinking. It's not like in a room. Anything? Okay, it deals with men and women as women, and assigns them responsibilities. Are there any other comments on that? No? Okay, let's move on. So just some things to reflect on. So we have no doubt that Islam nurtures mutual respect between men and women. And by that we mean it gets to the crux of the issue. It doesn't deal with it as a form of legislation. It understands that men and women have roles, men and women need to respect each other. We do not undervalue or devalue someone because they do not do a certain role. So in this society, there's been a big push that women need to be elevated by doing what men are allowed to do, not that they're valued for what they are doing. So if a woman is an amazing mother and looks after children and teaches them, that's not valued because it doesn't bring economic wealth. It doesn't increase your GDP. Islam has a very different view on that. Also, Islam deals with issues before they occur. So unlike society, which Bilal said is free, and then they get shot in the foot when they realize their freedom doesn't work because it leads to all sorts of problems. Islam tells us, la taqrabu zina, don't approach zina. It tells us how to engage with one another. Our relationships between one another are defined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We know clearly how Islam expects us to act. We don't have things like, so there's some other comments, but I just want to just mention them. So why don't you just explain that so we don't have miss much time. It shows how men and women, how they are, and not for men or women to decide what's good for themselves. Yeah, excellent point. So we don't, unlike humans who constantly try to devise and define their own roles, Islam actually gives us a clarity on these things. Marriage and family unit are the center of society. So we know this is a really fundamental part. Having a marriage and family means that you do not have these very open and free relationships that exist, which kind of lead to abuse and don't lead to any security or kind of nurturing of the next society or the next generation. Rules related to our conduct and dress code help preserve modesty. So lowering the gaze, the way we dress, the way we interact with each other, not being left in seclusion, not free mixing. All these things help protect society.
شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان.
Okay, so I just wanted to touch upon these last few slides just by reflecting on this ayah. And I didn't want to bring this ayah at the beginning. So what I wanted to do is look at all those points that we discussed and understand the power of this verse. This is the month where the Quran was revealed. And when we say it was a guidance and self-evident proof of that guidance and a standard by which to discern the true from the false, this is what we mean. Islam addresses every aspect of our lives. When we talk about Tawheed, when we talk about the meaning of worship, it covers every aspect. This is the deen of Islam. So this ayah is so heavy if we understood it, that there isn't anything left. No economic issue, no issue related to relationships, no issue related to inheritance, no issue related to governance, no issue related to crime that Islam doesn't address. It gives us that complete guidance to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to live a good life, to be happy, and to reach the best and most important goal, the akhirah, Jannat al-Firdaus. And I wanted to end with just this beautiful hadith that I came across. And this hadith talks about the most beloved to Allah. And I've just highlighted in green some of the points just mentioned in one hadith. Those who are beneficial to people, those who make a Muslim happy, those who remove one of his troubles, those who forgive his debt, feed the hungry, those who walk with them in their need, those who swallow their anger, those who suppress their rage, and those who walk with their brother regarding their need until he secures it for him. This hadith and this deen and the Sahaba that we praise and we look to were built upon such a hadith. They were built upon such ayat. They did not come in a vacuum. Let's be clear about this. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was not a great Khalifa who came about from within a vacuum. He came because he was nurtured by this deen. This is Abu Bakr as-Siddiq who was rushing to free the slaves who were being oppressed in Mecca. The leader of the Muslim world after the Prophet ﷺ's death was a man who used to free the slaves of Mecca. The one who followed him, Umar al-Khattab, he was a man who fought hard for this deen, who when he became Muslim, he abandoned all those traits of Jahiliyyah, knocking on the doors of the Qurayshi leaders to tell them that he had embraced this deen. And he stood as a great support to the Muslims early on, with him and Hamza leading the Muslims out. Ali, Uthman, and all of the Sahaba, radallahu anhum, they were built by such verses and such a hadith. And we just need to remember that this deen has to penetrate our hearts and minds. That is the leadership of Islam. These are the leaders that we want to generate. They have to understand this deen. They have to be close to the hadith, close to the ayat. They need to be the first to support their family. They need to be the first to help the hungry. They need to be the first to swallow their anger and forgive debts and help people, because this is the deen that we need. It can't be two, separate things where we have our aspirations on one hand to be the best leaders in the world, but we on a personal level fail. It has to be brought together to give you this power. And this is the deen of Islam. When these things are combined, it is an extremely powerful combination. And I just really thought this hadith was beautiful, just to show how this deen affects every aspect of our lives. And just on my final slide, Islam as the guidance directly revealed to us from our Creator is perfectly balanced to create tranquility in this life and success in the hereafter. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه غفور رحيم.